There's an old gem that we've all been taught in one way or another at some point. There are no new ideas. 7 archetypal stories is all we've got to encapsulate the human experience. Every civilization has built different iterations of the tech we so often rely upon. And what is old will become new, will become obsolete once more. But don't let that cause you to fall into dismay. It's actually a good thing. It's all part of being human, and if you can recognize the patterns, you're streets ahead. Now, this might sound like the introduction to an anthropology lecture, but it's actually the intro to a YouTube video about a couple of famous paranormal investigators. We're taking these pre-existing tales and molding them to fit the needs of a modern movie-going audience. It's time for the top 5 scary Ed and Lorraine Warren cases that should be turned into movies part 2. Coming in number 5, we've got Union Cemetery. Well, it was bound to happen, a haunted cemetery, who would have guessed? That's the thing too, I feel like so many horror movies over the years just straight up avoid cemeteries. It's always the demons in the house, ghosts in the hotel, apparitions down by the river. You would think it would be a no-brainer to situate a spooky movie in a place populated by mostly people past due, but hey. So this story is quite an interesting one and features the classic woman in white ghost. Known as one of the most haunted cemeteries in America, Union Cemetery sits in Easton, Connecticut. Damn, Connecticut, you really are haunted. So even before the Warrens arrived on the scene, this place had a reputation for the paranormal. All sorts of folks claim to have seen the cemetery's most famous ghost, the White Lady of Easton. Out of context, that might sound scary in a whole other way, but for now, we focus on ghostly details. Her signature trick is to jump in front of moving vehicles near the cemetery, startling drivers and often causing them to veer off the road. When Ed and Lorraine came to visit, they claimed to have seen the White Lady themselves, although not for very long. Ed saw a collection of ghost lights come together to form the shape of a woman, one with dark hair, a white dress, and possibly most startling of all, no facial features. He didn't get a chance to really soak it in though, as when he stepped towards her, she disappeared. A movie that investigated the origins and motivations of just such a ghost would be quite interesting, especially with some real spooky car scenes. What's more is that there's another spirit that seems to haunt Union Cemetery. Visitors have reported seeing glowing red eyes watching them from the bushes as they made their way through. This entity has been aptly named Red Eyes and could add some extra scares and texture to the overall story. Plenty of potential in this tale. Coming in at number 4, we've got Poor Frenchie. That's a blast from the past, eh? It's been a while since I've heard of anyone being referred to as Frenchie, but here we are. It's such an old-fashioned nickname, don't you think? Interestingly enough, we've actually seen a bit of Frenchie before in the Conjuring series. He makes a quick appearance in both the original movie, when Ed and Lorraine explain the stages of possession, and again in The Nun. But we want more of the man known as Maurice Thoreau. Kicking this adaptation off easy, there's already a book about this particular case. Known as Satan's Harvest, it draws from a few different accounts of what happened. We get perspective from the Boston Herald reporters who were first on the scene, some accounts from folks close to Frenchie, and of course, the Warrens' take on the matter. It's a tale of a Massachusetts farmer who seemed to have 2 personalities living inside of him. On one side, he was the hardworking, friendly, and all-around amicable guy that many aspire to be. But he had a much darker personality hiding within, one that was terribly abusive towards his children and that he had little to no control over. He first went to the police for help, but they couldn't do much. Then he saw his priest, who wasn't prepared to deal with whatever demons were inside of him. So finally, he contacted Ed and Lorraine, who came through and witnessed the unspeakable. Frenchie was contorting into inhuman shapes, bleeding from the eyes, and covered in raised welts, taking the shapes of crosses and profane phrases in French. At that point, they knew they'd have to bring in an expert exorcist, Bishop Robert McKenna. I think that a movie specifically looking at Frenchie's struggles would be fascinating, especially if the arrival of the Warrens happened later. Like, wouldn't it be interesting to watch as this upstanding, community-driven man realizes there's something dark within him? He's not sure if it's a devil or his own mind, and his family is starting to catch on. He wants to get help, but doesn't know where. A slow descent into madness has been done before, but with a few historical nods and a couple Conjuring tie-ins, this could make for some excellent viewing. Coming at number 3, we've got the Snedekers. First of all, great name. Snedeker. It's just fun to say. I wonder if that had anything to do with the demons causing untold amounts of pain and misfortune in this family's life. Like, these evil entities were all like, hey, it's the Snedekers. Sounds fun, right? Let's go mess with them. There's a good chance you're already familiar with this particular case. It's extra gruesome with a nice dollop of morbidity for good measure. If you've seen The Haunting in Connecticut, you know the Snedekers. But like most movies made in the early 2000s, there was a bit left to be desired. I'd love to see this flick reimagined with all sorts of additional details, maybe even some flashbacks to the original crimes, because there's a lot going on here. The Snedekers moved to a seemingly normal home in order to be closer to the hospital their son was being treated at. It was a fixer-upper for sure, but the price was right and the location was exactly what they needed. However, the realtors seemed to neglect to tell them that it was once a funeral parlor. And worse yet, the dude who ran it wasn't the most moral of folks. He had been known to do things to the bodies left in his care, and there was talk of other assorted rituals being completed here. So when the Snedekers settled in, they started experiencing unexplainable events. It kicked off with classic poltergeist activity and escalated to full-on assaults. It's a pretty famous story at this point and would work well within the framework already set up. A lot of paranormal enthusiasts were disappointed in the changes made to complete the haunting in Connecticut, so this is a golden opportunity to rework the story to match the original tale more closely. Coming in at number 2, we've got Borley Church. And you might be thinking, hey, they've done this before. And you know what? You're technically right. This is the church that a lot of the stuff that happened in The Nun was based on. But folks love Valak and could use a lot more of this terrifying church-going demon and its contemporaries. The Nun took place, chronologically anyway, way before the Warrens got started with their demonology practice. So what if we got a movie of them returning to this church in their own time? They did travel to England to get a closer look at this haunted spot and even seemed to find out some stuff about the ghosts that lived there. There's a legend of a nun and a monk who carried out an affair and paid the ultimate price. Learning about this steamy romance and then having the Warrens arrive to puzzle out what the haunting was all about could make for some great silver screen action. Find a way to bring in the demon once more and add some other crossover events and you've got a spooky summer blockbuster that'll have fans looking at their local places of worship a little differently. And finally at number 1 we've got Amityville. And one more that folks will definitely be well acquainted with. Of course, we've all heard of the Amityville Horror. There's a lot of history in that home, from the atrocity Ronald DeFeo Jr. committed to the ever-controversial claims from the Lutz family. I'm not really sure what would make for the most compelling movie though. I think the true crime crowd would definitely be interested in the inner machinations of a man who decided to kill his entire family in the night. Possibly even more interesting, why would the Lutz family decide that a year after said unfortunate event was the right time to move in? The purported haunting itself and the involvement of the Warrens might play second fiddle if we're being honest. The paranormal aspects have been investigated plenty, so what if we took the skeptical angle and delved into the psyches of those who lived in the house rather than the demons they claim to see? Now that could raise some eyebrows and turn some heads. Personally, I'm very excited to see these ideas in action. However, if they do end up hitting the big screen without a little financial compensation to yours truly, well, they'll be hell to pay. So, what'd you think of the list? Do you agree with my picks? What's the best Warren case to adapt for a screenplay? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more impassioned ones from part 1. Toxic Trait CX says, gotta call my boy Ichigo to take care of this. Something tells me like any Soul Reaper would be more than capable of taking down any of the Conjuring demons. Sabil Salman says, in an upcoming Conjuring movie, Ed and Lorraine will team up with the Avengers to stop the spirit of Thanos from possessing Annabelle. We're close to that crossover, I can feel it. G-Watch says, Blumhouse doesn't do the Conjuring films, Warner Brothers does. It's a good fact check. My brain put James Wan and Michael Blum in an inseparable container for whatever reason. But yes, Conjuring is Warner Bros. Mike Zombie Gaiman says, I want to see the movie where they get called out for being frauds. Even the girls from the Enfield house came out and said they forced them to say stuff and throw things when people were not looking. Give it another 10 years or so and we'll start seeing the flicks where they're called out for fakery. For now, they're just too profitable. And El Shaitan says, I think their investigations in Japan would make for great films. And I agree. That's all the time we have for today. I'm going to turn the ceiling fan to 11 and strap on a pair of moon shoes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.